So let's talk about the time that I worked at NVIDIA. This was a very crazy and also very exciting time in my life. So the year was 2012, and I was doing an internship at the Santa Clara office, and I spent time working on the CUDA automation team. And to keep the format of this video similar to the other one that I did about Amazon, I'll start by reading the performance evaluation that my manager wrote about me. Supervisor's comments. Robert's focus with us has been automation work in testing CUDA, mainly the reporting of results aspects of CUDA regression testing, which occur nightly, and whose results are kept in a database and extracted as needed. Robert has been absolutely awesome in helping us with multiple projects in his short time with us. He not only produced the assigned task in a timely manner, he took them in a whole new and better direction, with minimal to no supervision. He takes on tasks without my saying so, drives them to completion with his leads, and completes them. Robert clearly communicates well, both with his leads and the overseas team. His interpersonal interactions with other team members is very good. Robert's productivity and knowledge of various language we use is quite impressive. In addition, he had an incredibly fast ramp-up time, which made him quickly productive. Not only were his projects done on time, but they were coded in such a way as to allow very quick adaptability to end-user inputs. He has been by far the best intern we have had in the CUDA automation team. His productivity is stellar. His approach to problem solving is excellent. It has been fantastic having him here for the duration, and we would bring him back anytime. Now, in contrast to my experiences at Amazon, I don't actually recall any negative experiences with coworkers at NVIDIA. In fact, I might go so far as to say that my manager at NVIDIA was the best manager that I had at any company ever. I think I only had about 2 meetings with him. I distinctly recall him saying that he was not a big fan of meetings, and his philosophy was just to leave the developers alone and let them work. And in this case, I think that worked well. Now, I have a lot of other interesting things to say about the time that I worked there, and I'll divide those into positives and negatives. So first we'll do the positives. So as I mentioned, my manager was very hands-off and he just let us do our work, and I felt quite productive during my time at NVIDIA. The main thing that I worked on during my time there was rewriting an internal test result dashboard. So the developers had access to a test result dashboard that would show them the results of which tests were failing on certain video cards, operating systems, things like that. And the previous site that they had was extremely slow loading and it was very difficult to get feedback. And I basically rewrote this website so that it would load a lot faster, and I also made it so that developers could ask for results specifically for the test that they're interested in. Now, I recall that the name of my team was the CUDA automation team. And as I understand, the main purpose of this team was to make sure that all of the different drivers for all the different various video cards and operating systems were properly integrated into whatever system. Now, an interesting and amusing piece of history is my internship actually coincided with the famous speech by Linus Torvalds, where he did the single finger salute to the camera and said F NVIDIA. And I remember by chance, I happened to watch that video. I think it might have actually been the day it came out. It might have been linked on Hacker News or something. And I remember the next day, I actually shared that video in the group chat with my team, and they all thought it was actually pretty funny. And to top it all off, this was around the period where I actually started experimenting with trying to run Linux natively on my laptop. And I remember at the time, I happened to have a laptop with an NVIDIA video card in it, and when I tried installing Linux on my own machine, there was some significant issue with the graphics drivers. If I recall correctly, it had something to do with, I think it was NVIDIA Optimus. It was some sort of power saving feature that would switch between, I think, integrated graphics and the dedicated video card. And of course, this was supported on Windows, but it wasn't supported on Linux. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, what a convenient position to be in. I can't get my NVIDIA graphics card working with Linux, but I'm actually currently working at NVIDIA on the driver integration team. So I brought my laptop into work and I asked my colleagues about it. And I think the conclusion was my laptop was just not a supported hardware configuration. And I recall maybe a month later or so, I think there was someone on a separate team who said there might be some support coming for this down the road. I'm not sure if they ever got around to supporting it though. Now, the next interesting story is the time that Jensen, the CEO of NVIDIA, invited all the interns to come attend a talk he was giving. And there was a lot of excitement about this talk, and instead I actually skipped this talk to attend a different talk by the then CEO of Twitter. And looking at my notes, it was Dick Costello at the time. And on this particular day, I came into work early so that I could leave a bit early, and I rode my bicycle to the Caltrain station in Santa Clara, took the train up to San Francisco, drove my bicycle over to the Twitter headquarters in Tenderloin, where I attended the talk at Twitter headquarters. And the reason I went there was I was hoping to eventually get an internship at Twitter. And they did eventually put me through 6 rounds of interviews, but then they said they have no positions. And by the time the Twitter talk was over, it was pretty dark at that point. So I hopped on my bicycle, I drove in the dark through the Tenderloin area, back to the Caltrain station where I hopped on the Caltrain and eventually biked home. And the next day when I came into work, I found out, to my surprise, that Jensen at the stock had invited all of the interns over to his house. And so during that day, we weren't going to work. We were going to go to Jensen's house and have a catered meal and hang out with him. So we all hopped on a few buses. We bussed over to Jensen's house. We got to enjoy a bunch of catered food. And Jensen basically just let us hang out, and he just let us wander around and look at all the cool stuff in his house. And I got my photo taken with Jensen. Originally, I remember I asked Jensen if I could just take a picture of him. And when I asked that, he said, why would you want to take a picture of just me? Why don't you get a picture with me? And at the time, I didn't really think much about getting myself in the picture. I just wanted a picture of Jensen. But of course, in hindsight, I'm glad that I actually got that picture because I can prove that I was there now. But if I had known I was going to get this picture taken this day, then I probably would have shaved and got a haircut and maybe put a better shirt on. All right, let's talk about some of the negatives now. Now, unsurprisingly, I had a lot of trouble finding housing down there. And it's even worse when you have to find housing for a 4-month internship, because nobody wants to rent for 4 months, they want to rent for a 1-year lease. So this was back when Airbnb was pretty good. So I was able to find a place for $1,000 a month for a single room in San Jose. And I actually had to ride my bicycle from San Jose to Santa Clara every day on the highway and through a bunch of trails in order to get to work. I think I stayed there for about 5 weeks or something, and then I moved to another place that was a lot closer to NVIDIA. The bike route was much better, but again, that was not a permanent place. So during my 4-month internship, I actually stayed in 3 different places. The last place I moved into was a hacker hostel, and this place was actually pretty good. I think it was only $600 a month, but the downside was I was sleeping in a bunk bed in a room with 6 people. But I was happy to do it because there was literally no housing at this point. And around this time, I was just desperately spending every single lunch break, constantly checking Airbnb and all of the listings, and I can't tell you how many places I called. I remember there was one place that I checked out. They were asking for $700 a month. There were already quite a few people living in this house, and when I came in to view the place, it was absolutely filthy. If you've ever just not swept your floor for a few months, and you'll probably notice that dust and lint and stuff will build up kind of on the edges wherever you're not walking. And in the center of all the hallways, that's where it'll be clean, but on the sides, it's, there's tons of dust bunnies and stuff. In fact, it's probably the worst example of that I can recall. And in this house, they didn't have any more rooms left, but what they were offering was a place to sleep on the floor on a pile of old carpets for $700 a month. And I actually considered taking it because at the time, that was the only thing available for a short-term stay. Luckily, though, I was able to move into the place with all the bunk beds. Another interesting note is that in the informational material that NVIDIA hands out to interns, they have a list of apartment buildings that are available that a lot of interns stay at. Now, the reason I didn't pick those is because they were a lot more expensive, and they also wanted year-long leases. And I can't really do something like that for a 4-month internship unless I sublet it or find some agreement with another person. But I remember that I did call one of these companies, and I asked them about their pricing. And when I brought up the price, the first thing they said was, "Oh, that's way out of date. That's years old. The price is actually this now." And they quoted some price that was a few $100s higher. And I remember during my exit interview with the university coordinator at NVIDIA, I brought up this fact. I said, "Hey, your pamphlets that you're handing out, they're out of date. They have the wrong numbers from a previous year." And at that point, she told me they definitely are not out of date. And she triple checked it to make sure. And she said she was in close contact with this apartment company and that they had sent her a basket full of fruits and stuff as a thank you for sending so many interns over there. So my guess is that this is just a trick they do for everyone. They tell everyone that the price is a lot higher. Another interesting thing that happened during this internship, and actually every internship that I did in the US, was I got my first tentative non-confirmation agreement from the Department of Homeland Security, which sounds really scary, but I guess it's some formality where I think you're supposed to explicitly notify someone once you actually get in the US. Now, in my subsequent 2 internships, I made sure to do this, and every single time I still got a tentative non-confirmation agreement. I even remember on my last internship at Amazon, the HR lady reached out to me and she was a bit confused and concerned. And of course, I just asked her, "Oh, I must have gotten a tentative non-confirmation agreement from the Department of Homeland Security." So I mentioned biking to work down there, so that was a fun experience. Now, during the first place that I lived, there was an option of taking 2 buses to possibly get to work, but the bus system down there is incredibly unreliable. When I was down there, it was even worse than it is up here in Ontario. I remember waiting for a bus somewhere down in San Jose, and when I got to the bus stop, there was a very angry man there who didn't speak English very well, but he was able to communicate to me in frustration that he had been waiting there so long, the bus was supposed to have come at least 2 times prior, but it just didn't come. And then I think I waited there for at least a couple rounds where the bus was supposed to come, and then when it finally did come, 2 buses came at the same time. Now, when I bought my bicycle, I just decided to go with the cheapest bike I could find. And before my first day of work, I decided to do a trial run just to see if I could actually get to work and back and not get lost. And something that I wasn't prepared for about California is how many spiky things there are everywhere. If you've ever tried biking around in that area, you know that some places are extremely unfriendly to pedestrians or bikes. So there were a lot of places where there was not a lot of shoulder on the road, and I would try and bike as far away from cars as possible. But unfortunately, that meant sometimes my tires would touch the vegetation. But on this test trip, I made it to NVIDIA, but on my way back, I ran over some sort of wooden, inch-long set of spikes that went all through my tire. And it wasn't just one of them, there were tons of these things littered all over the side of the road. So I didn't actually make it back on my bike. I think I ended up walking the bike the rest of the way back. And once I got back, I decided, I gotta get this tire fixed. So I had to load the bike on the front of the bus, take it back to the tire shop, get a new tire put on. I did all of this, got back home, and when I woke up the next day to check my bike, the other tire was flat. So at that point, I decided to go back to the bike shop, and I got him to put on the heaviest tires that they possibly could. So I think I spent just as much on the tires as I did on the bike. But fortunately, I didn't get any more flats again. And to give you an idea of how hostile the environment down there is to bicycles, this is a picture of the intersection that I had to cross every day on my bicycle. This is actually just out in front of NVIDIA. Now, in terms of the working atmosphere at NVIDIA, that was actually one of the reasons I didn't really want to go back. I remember that there was a super hardcore guy there who always wore a suit and tie, and I recall that he was a really intense assembly language programmer. And it seemed like every time that I looked at his cubicle, he was always there day or night. I remember during the day that we went to Jensen's house, when all the interns came back to NVIDIA to get their stuff and go home, I think it was at 9 at night at that point, and this guy was still there. He was working just as hard as ever. I was also aware that as an intern, you kind of get special treatment. The company wants you to come on as a full-time, so they spoil you a bit and make it seem like you're always going to get this kind of luxury treatment. But around the same time as when we went to visit Jensen's house, there was a contractor on my team who was let go. And that was one of my first experiences of seeing how cold and heartless the corporate machine can be. If I recall correctly, this guy was about to go on vacation, and I think it was his last day before the vacation. Partway through the day, he got notice that he was going to be laid off, and he was trying in good faith to actually complete his job and do the work he was supposed to. But at one point, halfway through the day, they deactivated all his keycards, so he couldn't even get into some of the labs to finish his work. He needed another coworker to let him in to get his work finished. And at one point, when he came back to his cubicle to enter some data, he found that they had completely taken his computer and removed his workstation. And so at that point, there was just nothing he could do, so he had to go home. The security culture at NVIDIA is very extreme, and everything's very locked down. And I completely understand why that is, and it's for good reason. And just like I said about working at Amazon, I did try to stay in touch with some of the full-times that I work with. I think a few months after my internship, I did send them an email to say hello, but nobody responded. And I think a well-founded reason for that is the security paranoia. If you're getting an email in personal or in work life from someone who's outside the company that you don't know very well, you don't really know if they're trying to steal trade secrets or something, so for the most part, you'll probably just ignore it. I remember that we had an orientation talk on the concept of people tailgating. So that's when someone would use their badge to enter the secure doors, and then someone else would tailgate in quickly behind you without badging in. And I remember having just left this security orientation, and there was a much older gray-haired man who almost tailgated in behind me. And so, of course, I had to do as I was instructed and reprimand this guy who was much senior to me about making sure to badge in. Now, in terms of developing social connections with the full-times, I found that that was not really a possibility. Most of the full-times seemed like they were really from a different generation. A lot of them had adult kids of their own and had really settled into their careers. In my other video about Amazon, I talked about how everyone had a 10,000-yard stare. And when I first started my internship, the people that I first started having lunch with were the people on my team. And I remember during lunchtime, there was almost no discussion between anyone on the team. I think there was only about 3 or 4 of us, and only about 1 or 2 of us actually said anything. But I do recall one guy in particular from another team who was friends with someone on our team and would occasionally stop by. I recalled that this guy did talk a lot, and he would regularly tell everyone in great detail about his heart condition. He would give us lots of updates about his visits to the doctor, and voice a lot of his concerns and anxieties about the subject. There were no other interns on my team, but I was eventually able to network around and find some other interns to have lunch with. Now, the experience of being in my cubicle all day is also something that I remember distinctly. I can't remember if I took this photo by accident or not, but this is actually a photo of the view in my cubicle. I remember the feeling of being in my cubicle as almost like being in a sensory deprivation tank. The only sounds that I could hear were the sounds of the air conditioning, and I remember in a cubicle somewhere near me, there was a guy who always used to make small talk with a guy who was in his same cubicle. Now, I don't know if I actually ever saw this guy, but I listened to him every day. I'm not actually sure what he looks like, because I never saw him talking. I just heard him talking through the cubicle. I remember that he would always bring up lots of boring and mundane details about his daily life, and tell these to the other person in the cubicle, who didn't really seem that interested. Now, there was nothing wrong with what this guy talked about, but This type of environment really didn't appeal to me. Sitting there for 10 years, staring at the wall of a cubicle, listening to the air conditioning, and this guy talk about his personal life. Now, I mentioned that I did have lunch with other people on my team sometimes, at least before that one guy got laid off, but other than that, I had basically no face-to-face interaction with other people on my team. In terms of the other interns, I only really got to know about 2 of them. I did hang out with them and a few other interns outside of work a few times. I added them on Facebook to keep in touch. These 2 people didn't go to the same school, so they didn't really keep in touch with each other either. Shortly after the internship, one of these interns killed himself. The other one I chatted with a few times on Facebook over the next couple years, but since then I haven't kept in touch at all. Now, I should also clarify that I don't actually remember 100% if they did indeed give me a full-time offer. At this point, I actually had 2 more internships to do and a couple years of school, so if I had gotten a full-time offer, it would have had to have been deferred anyway. Now, I'm not sure if I'm making this up, but I seem to recall something about $20,000 in stock options at the time, and obviously, if you look at the stock price for NVIDIA over the last 10 years, you would conclude that I would have been a multi-millionaire by now if I'd have taken an offer like that. But then again, it seems like the real winning move was actually not to take a job there, it was just to buy the stock. From what I recall, at the time, the NVIDIA salary wasn't that competitive, and most people would only go there as a second choice. At the time, Facebook, Microsoft, and Google were the preferred choices. So, in summary, why did I not pursue a full-time position at NVIDIA? I would say it's the same reasons that I didn't pursue a full-time position at Amazon. There's the total social isolation, the fact that everyone is always internally focused on their work there, everyone has a 1,000-yard stare all the time, and the extremely sterile and locked-down corporate environment. I think at this point, if you asked me if I regret my decision, I would say no, but I would say that I definitely regret not buying NVIDIA stock.